And it was in this context that Engels came out with this book, right? And this was following the death of Karl Marx. And although it is not entirely Engels' work, in the beginning, in the preface itself, Engels says that this is based on Karl Marx's notes that he had written after reading Lewis Morgan's works. So, to understand the arguments in the origin of the state, family, and private property in its entirety, to some extent, it is important to read the works of American anthropologist Lewis Morgan, right? So Morgan was a contemporary of Marx and Engels, and he was an anthropologist who was studying the Iroquois Confederacy, a Native American tribe, which existed in the northeastern part of continental United States. And basically, what he studied when he went to live with them, he was one of the champions. Morgan was one of the champions of land rights for the natives, for returning the land to the natives and all that. And the natives took him in quite well, and he was made one of the honorary members of one of the clans of the Iroquois Confederacy and so on. He had spent a good chunk of his life studying the Native Americans and the Native American family structure, right? And looking into the family structure, what he realized was that the Iroquois Confederacy as such was not a modern civilization, and we'll come to these categories later, in the sense that the relations of production had not advanced to such a point that there was a huge amount of surplus value, right?
I don't know. It's just dog. I will read it. I just
Comrade Aman,
you will read that a lot. That's always. Chaitanya is there for my moral support.
Comrade Aman, your mic is on.
I do ask everyone to stay silent. And another thing is that like nobody. Kadambari only there. Kadambari is
Comrade Aman,
another thing is another people who might have to speak.
can
They would
someone call Aman? Wait,
Aman, please mute your mic.
I don't think he's hearing us.
all set.
We'll have to call him. Okay, it's muted. Okay, so if you look at the Iroquois Confederacy specifically, what you can see in terms of the power structure, the political organizing of the clan, and the family organizing of the clan worked in such a way that was very unusual for Europeans of the Victorian era, in that the clans, basically the center of power, basically what would be the equivalent of a kind of parliament, where a lot of things would be democratically elected, was centered around something called a long house. A long house would be, as the name implies, a very long house where groups of people can sit together and make decisions, right? And the clans, each clan would be headed by law, by social law, a woman, and that woman would be the matriarch of the clan, and the different positions that would be given to the members of the tribe were actually given by the matriarch and a collection of women, right? So the two key differences of the Iroquois Confederacy was that with Victorian Europe or Christian Europe was basically that for one, it was matrilocal, and two, it was matrilineal, right? And what do these two words mean? So matrilocal means that like how does marriage happen now, right? It happens when a woman from some family marries a man and moves into the man's house, right? So the general stability is for men. They don't have to move around to marry generally, and they can remain locally. And women from some other locality or from some another area will marry and come to the men's locality. While the Iroquois Confederacy was matrilocal, which meant that the men married and went to, not married in the sense that we understand marriage now, but paired up with women and went to where the women lived, right? So it was matrilocal and it was matrilineal in that inheritance and basically the generations are were not counted down the male line. So if you look at a lot of European dynasties, kingdoms and all at that point, and even if you look at Indian inheritance too, like the kingdoms in India to a great extent, not everyone, of course, there are exceptions to all of this. The basic law is of male inheritance. The oldest male will be the inheritor of whatever the family has to give, including power. If you are the king, your son, your next oldest son would be the next king, and so on. Right. So this was not the case in the Iroquois Confederacy. It was it was matrilocal and matrilineal in the sense that it was centered around women and the daughters of women, not fathers and the sons of fathers. So it was an unusual system like that, or at least unusual for the Europeans, right? So it was this culture shock, at least to a great extent, for Morgan, that led him to studying the system and coming out with an anthropology, not just of the Iroquois Confederacy, but of a broader theory of how family structures had existed. Right? And it was on this works that Marx had commented, the comments of which Engels later used for developing the origin of the state and the origin of the state family and the private property. Right? So, in this sense, there are two main arguments, and everything else is basically an elaboration or giving evidence to these arguments. So, the first argument is that the family unit legal institution, the social institution, right? And this might sound familiar to those who have who attended the class on state and revolution, because in there it is a similar Marxist argument that the state also is not eternal. It's not eternal in the sense that it's not an entity that exists outside history, but that what is produced due to historical necessity. Right. So in this sense, Engels argued that the family unit is not some biological unit. It's not an eternal unit that somehow marks the ideal form of human organizing in kinship or anything like that. And the second argument is that why? Because the family unit, as is basically any other social institution, is constructed due to the change in material conditions across history. And he argued that when these historical conditions change, the unit of the family will also change with it, right? So the easiest way to understand when he says that it is not eternal, it's best to think about what has happened to India in the last 60 or 70 years, right? The joint family was one of the primary modes of what we now call the joint family, was one of the primary ways of organizing the family. If you look at it just 40 years ago, 50 years ago, it was the predominant form, right? In India, it is a type of family organizing that is now crumbling due to various reasons. So, as you know, the joint family would mean that there will be a plot of land, or there will be the plot of land on which you live, and on that there will be you, your brother, your brother's wife, their children. That's how the organizing of the joint family comprised. And if you notice now, I'm guessing that at least most of you grew up in nuclear families. Or at least the majority of you grew up in nuclear families. So in the last 60 years, India saw the breaking up of one form of family organizing into a smaller form of family organizing. And the reasons why that happened, we can get into later, right? So this is what I mean by the fact that it is not eternal and that it is built by historical necessity, right? So what was the historical necessity? He argued that what we now call the monogamous family unit, where the two partners, the man and the woman, would have only the other, whether the woman would only have sexual relations with the man and the man would only have sexual relations with the woman. That system is produced basically in according to his analysis due to class society again. I mean, it's with these Marxists again, and everything going back to class society, right? So the study begins basically with an attempt to classify prehistoric human society into three categories. That is savagery, barbarism, and civilization. And now when we hear these terms, we might feel like, oh, these are a little problematic colonial terms, like calling a group of people savage or barbaric and all that are now a more European term which was basically imposed on the rest of the world through the colonial project, right? But it is not in this sense that Engels is basically dividing prehistory. Although basically there is the words come with certain loaded colonial meanings. When Engels divides society into savagery, barbarism, and civilization, he means in terms of production and distribution of basically anything happen, mainly food, clothes, and different other basic necessities, how these things were produced and distributed, right? And so in this sense, basically savagery would be the time when we look at modern study of anthropology, would be the time of the Paleolithic part of human history. Generally, these are not, it's like a rule of thumb that you can follow. And barbarism would later be the later Neolithic period, and civilization would be the rest of recorded history, right? And what were the differences, right? In the first society, in Paleolithic society, stone tools were the common tools that were used by humans, as archaeologists have later discovered. Production of food was basically a very difficult task at that point, because agriculture in the form of organized agriculture that exists now had not yet been discovered. The rearing of animals in the form of domesticated animals did not happen in this period. So milk and sources of meat, etc., did not exist. The only source of meat that existed was either through scavenging or through hunting. And in this period, basically, Engels notes that you can see the first sexual division of labor. And what does he mean by sexual division of labor? He argues that due to the fact that women can give birth and that only women can nurture children in terms of, after the birth, the immediate care that an infant requires in terms of breastfeeding and so on. In these societies, although women and men largely did similar work in terms of mostly when women are free and not rearing children, work in terms of looking after the others, weaving huts, etc., all these works were commonly done. There existed some form of primitive sexual division of labor. And this division was based on the fact that hunting, which was a significant source of food for these tribes, could not be done by women when they became pregnant, and they could not do it while they were rearing children, breastfeeding children, looking after children, and so on. So men predominantly did the hunting, and women predominantly did the gathering work, gathering in the surrounding areas of the settlement and so on. And Engels notes that because in this period, the birthing of a child, because it was seen as such important work, because gathering was actually a bigger source. I mean, these are later accounts, was as a bigger source of food and a more definite source of food for the family than hunting, because every time you go out for hunting, you might not necessarily get a catch. But in terms of that, gathering food, gathering fruits and berries and all that was a more stable form of procuring food for the settlement. So women's labor was valued, and due to this, if you notice the societies, they are largely egalitarian in terms of the relationship between men and women. And how do we know that? These are societies that existed tens of thousands of years ago. How can we possibly know the status of women and the status of men in these societies, right? And this is where other anthropological studies and other studies of existing tribes in the world. There are existing uncontacted tribes. There are existing accounts, including colonial accounts of tribes that were hunter-gatherer tribes in Africa, in Australia, in East Asia, in India, in North and South America. In all these places, there are existing accounts of many different tribes. And Engels goes into all these accounts to come to a generalized conclusion that in these societies, two things don't exist. One is the institution of patriarchy as we understand it now, where men holds a significant amount of more power than women, where the bodies of women are controlled by men and so on. And two, the institution of the monogamous family unit did not exist in these societies. They still don't. If you can still look at certain tribes across the world, the concept of a monogamous family unit is very new, right, for them. What was understood from that was basically that there was no historical need by that point for the monogamous family unit to exist. And basically, the primary reason for this was there was no inheritance of private property, and we'll come to this later, right? The only inheritance that anyone ever had was the small personal belongings of individuals in certain tribes, and these would be inherited largely by the entire clan itself, and not to any specific son or any specific daughter of a specific tribe, right? There is a certain kind of consanguinity in these family units. By consanguinity, we mean that a generation of people are identified around being descendants of a particular individual, right? But since the monogamous family unit as such did not exist, and any woman, and usually the women in power or powerful women in these tribes, since they were free to have sexual relations with multiple men, there were always doubts regarding whose child is it in terms of the father. The father could never be clearly identified, but the mother could always be clearly identified because the mother is giving birth to the child, and we clearly know who gave birth to which child, right? So most of the consanguinity in this period existed around the women. And here Engels sort of gives some credit to this idea brought by Morgan, which is the idea of the mother right. That he argued that prehistoric human societies, before production was organized in such a way, or before the means of production became sufficiently advanced and the private property existed as it exists now, basically the mother right existed, that women held significant positions of power, and that women had a significant role in controlling societies, in controlling these tribal settlements and these societies than what men had, right? This was the conclusion that Engels came through regarding the study of more primitive societies, primitive in terms of production. And he argues that it is with the advent of private property, right? What are the two important changes that mark the advent of private property? One is the domestication of animals. This you see around the Neolithic time, what the second stage of prehistory, as described by Engels, which he calls barbarism, right? Or we can more correctly now call the Neolithic era, when the domestication of cattle, the domestication of chicken, the domestication of a lot of animals happen. And this domestication basically also helps in the development of primitive agriculture, right? Because you can't the domestication of animals sort of made settlements into pastoral nomadic communities, because when you run out of pastoral land in one area, you had to nomadically move to another area and so on. And this sort of coincides with the later development of primitive agriculture. And the advantage that primitive agriculture had was that there was enough surplus in agriculture to not just feed the humans, but to feed the cattle as well, which meant that you don't have to really travel around as nomadic communities, and that large settled populations of humans could happen at this point, right? He argues in the book that it was in this period when agriculture starts coming in, land starts becoming an important factor of production, because those who controlled the land basically controlled how production happened, who took the what is produced, how it was distributed, and so on, and held significant power in terms of the influence they had in society, right? And Engels argues that it was in this time, due to men being the ones largely going outside and hunting for animals and so on, men during this period of transition take control over the means of production, and that in this time we start seeing the first large settlements. Usually old hunter-gatherer societies never go beyond 100 or 150 members in a tribe, because a certain area could not produce enough food through hunting and gathering that could feed a tribe. But with the discovery of agriculture and domestication of animals, there would be enough surplus in a limited area that can support a large settlement, a large population. And this is when we start seeing the first large settlements, which would later evolve into the first cities and the first civilizations as we understand them now. The three significant and the oldest ones being the one in the Indus Valley, the one in Egypt around the Nile, and the one between the one around the Euphrates River, what we call what was it? The Mesopotamians, right? And if you look at these societies, you can see, especially because we have a lot of clarity in understanding ancient Egypt, because a lot of the hieroglyphics were deciphered, and you could understand how society worked 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago in some cases. That it was in this time that you see the family unit coming into being. And Engels argues that this comes for a very particular reason, right? Which is that since men now control the means of production and the tools with which you cultivate and so on, it becomes very important for men to understand inheritance, in that who is my son or who is the next in line, so that when I die, to understand who the land will go to, right? And polygamy as it existed before that was not a very conducive thing, because if multiple men had sexual relations with one woman, basically the men themselves would not be able to figure out whose child it is, right? So with the advent of class society and with men controlling most of the means of production, it became important for men for the continuation of this system to control the bodies of women. By controlling the bodies of women, I mean limiting them sexually, in terms of limiting who they are allowed to have sexual relations with, to figure out basically, or in an attempt to figure out who the son is, basically to make sure that I am the father. Like if I am the man who controls the means of production, I need to know that my wife basically is not going around sleeping with someone else, because then only I am sure that my son is my son, and so on and so forth, right? And it is with this period that Engels calls the historical defeat of the female sex, right? That with private property, that basically men start controlling the bodies of women, and the institution of patriarchy, as we call it now, starts coming into being in its fullest form. So he argued basically that in this sense, the institution of the family is no longer a natural institution as much as it is constructed historically. And the important question came, right, which is basically if this is not a natural way of organizing people, and that it is product of class society and so on. Since we are socialists and we are imagining a society where class relations do not exist, what will the family institution turn into, right? What will the institution of the family exist as it exists now, when class society is finally abolished, right? In this, I guess, I'll quote directly from Engels himself. It's one of his most beautiful quotes, in my opinion. He says, but what will there be new? This will be answered when a new generation has grown up. A generation of men who never in their lives have known what it is to buy a woman's surrender with money or any other social instrument of power. A generation of women who have never known what it is to give themselves to a man from any other considerations other than real love, or to refuse to give themselves to their lover from fear of economic consequences. When these people are in the world, they will care precious little what anybody thinks, uh, uh, what anybody today thinks what they ought to do. They will make their own practice and their corresponding public opinion about the practice of each individual, and that will be the end of it, right? So uh, this is basically important because this text served as one of the seminal, one of the primary sources, or one of the original feminist texts. Although Engels did not himself call himself a feminist because the term did not exist at that point. Now, in retrospect, we understand that it was one of the first scientific studies of the institution of patriarchy, the institution of family, and how do we fight these institutions, and how to align our struggle in the fighting of these institutions, right? So, does this mean, as socialists, that we today, in this day and age, fight for the immediate abolition of the family and file a case in the Supreme Court for the family unit to not be recognized anymore and all that? No, when we have to understand, when we make these assumptions, when we are clearly saying that the institution of the family exists so for the subjugation of women, for the control of women's bodies by men, and all these things, while we are coming to the conclusion, we are not under the illusion that this body, this institution which has existed for thousands of years, can be abolished overnight, and that it can only be abolished when the historical conditions that necessitate its existence is abolished, right? So that is essentially the important aspects of the text. The text itself goes into some detailed studies into the Iroquois Confederacy, into ancient Greek, especially Athenian society, and the origins of family there, and so on. Which, if I go into detail, this will turn into a much longer class. So, since these classes are intended at giving you a basic understanding, so that you can approach these texts with the sort of arguments, with the general grasp of the arguments that are going to come, I'm going to end here, and I'm going to ask all of you to ask the questions. So naturally, you're going to have a lot of doubts. So you can ask them now, right? Preferably, if you can type it out in the chat, that would be better, because I don't have my headphones. I didn't bring them, and there is a lot of traffic from the road outside, so hearing is a little difficult. So if you can type them out, that would be better, right? Thank you.
So now the floor is open to questions. If anybody is having any question, you can type on the chat box.
What would a society without family look like in the present scheme of things? So we cannot claim to accurately predict what a society without class, what all these specific things are going to look like, right? Like in that final quote from Engels himself, I read when I read it out. When people without the material conditions that oppress them, that oh, if I don't marry, society is going to ostracize me. That if I don't marry, I'm going to go into financial ruin. That basically, without these considerations, when people are free to love each other in whatever way they can and exist together in that form, what kind of society will form? I guess we'll have to wait and watch until after the revolution. I guess there is. I don't think there is a way that we can see into the future, because basically the only reality that we've been exposed to is the reality of class society and that of the family unit, which I'm guessing most of you grew up in. So it is very difficult to imagine, and I don't think Engels himself, even in the end of the text, does not say that okay, this is how relations between people are going to be. This is what people do, and all that. Marxists generally try not to make such assumptions. Uh, yeah, so that. What do you consider the new arising culture of polyarmory as? Can it be considered as another step in moving forward, or is it just a reaction to capitalist alienation? Well, I guess in that sense, this question is a little complicated. And uh, polyarmory and all that, see, between consenting individuals, uh, the freedoms that we are attaining democratically, socially, etc., that in terms of emotional attachment, in terms of sexual relations between two or any other number of consenting individuals, if it is allowed, it is good. Ultimately, there's nothing wrong with it as such. Uh, it can be, in a vague sense, be considered as moving forward, right? But what we have to consider here is when we say two consenting individuals, right? How is this consent made? That is an important question to look at, right? Because we agree that even at this stage in society, clearly men and women are not equal in terms of their social status. They're equal because of a whole host of reasons. And without that equality, like with this inequality in mind, polyarmory and such, who it benefits and who it will damage and all that, basically, it has to be looked into, right? So I guess in some sense it's a move forward, but we also have to look at it critically in terms of keeping in mind that men and women have not attained equality in terms of social equality, in terms of uh, the status that they're given in society. And with that inequality in their status, to what extent polyarmory and such cultures that are arising now in capitalist societies, how how basically what it means for a man and what it means for a woman might not be necessarily the same things. So yeah, I guess it's complicated. Yeah. Any other questions? See, until the next question comes, I'll add to a certain point that to the answer of the last question. Then this is also sort of connected to the question regarding basically what in some among some Western feminists at least, that they argue that this Marxist argument that prostitution as it exists now in class society should be abolished as soon as possible. There are arguments that if men that the basic argument that Marxists make is that prostitution is the selling of a women's body, and that it cannot take place outside basically the oppressive patriarchal structure. That women are forced to sell their body and not men primarily. Prostitution is an institution dominated by women in terms of who do the selling of their labor. That it cannot exist outside the institution of patriarchy and the institution of wage labor and wage slavery itself, right? Uh, and that basically any labor that requires you to that any system that requires you to sell your labor uh, under the threat of basically either you sell your labor or you starve, which includes men going down into mines for mining, risking their life, or women subjugating themselves to this patriarchal institution of prostitution. That we are for the abolishing of all these institutions, and that we don't believe that no matter what the condition, it's very difficult to imagine a woman freely choosing to go into the industry of prostitution and such. So that would be sort of a connected answer in the sense that as long as the inequality exists between men and women, and that inequality is also based on class society, we cannot have uh, basically a significant step forward from this institution of the family. What can break this institution of the family? Because if you look at it, this arising culture of polyamory has come and gone also in the past. It came in the 60s in the US and in parts of Europe as well, when the hippie movement and the sexual liberation movement and all started. But then again, that died down, and family again became sort of a primary unit. So these trends and these changes in culture will sort of come and go. But to destroy the primacy of the family, it requires basically the destruction of class society. Yes, at least that's what I think. Any other questions?
If anybody is having any questions, you can type on the chat box.
Okay, then if nothing else is there, I guess that's it. Comrade Akshay. Yeah, I guess there's no more questions. So thank you, comrades, for coming to this and for listening. Thank you for inviting. Wait, a question came last minute.
Yes, comrade. So I guess it was a very informative session and the lecture was so good. I hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you, comrade, for spending your time, precious time with us and enlightening on the Frederick Inker's book. So, Bread and Roses, Lazar, and Godavari Parulika Study Circle, Miranda House has been organizing many such sessions and lectures in connections with my Marxist ideologies as well as other topics such as caste, class, feminism, etc. So we'll be having similar sessions in coming weeks too. So I hope you all enjoyed. I'll be sending the link for the Instagram page of Bread and Roses and Godavari Parulaka Study Circle. I request everyone to follow to be updated about such lectures. And last but not the least, I thank everyone who took their time to attend this meeting. And thank you, Comrade. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Gopal.